August 10th, 1628. Stockholm Harbor is packed shoulder to shoulder. Cannons fire in salute. Flags snap in the wind. And the pride of the Swedish Navy, the most powerful warship ever built in Northern Europe, glides away from the dock for the very first time. It doesn't make it past the harbor, less than a nautical mile from where it launched. In full view of the crowd that came to celebrate it, the ship rolls onto its side, water pours through its open gun ports, and it plunges to the bottom of the sea. Somewhere between 30 and 50 people drown in front of their families in calm water on a clear summer day. There was no storm, there was no enemy, there was no battle. There was only a king who refused to listen, and a ship built to satisfy his ego instead of the laws of physics. This is the story of the Vasa, a ship so advanced for its time that it carried 64 bronze cannons, so beautifully decorated that it was covered in hundreds of carved wooden sculptures painted in gold, crimson, and blue. It was meant to be a floating declaration of Swedish power, built to terrify every rival navy in the Baltic Sea. At the center of this story is a man named Gustavus Adolphus, the King of Sweden, a brilliant military reformer and one of the most respected commanders in European history. He modernized his army, reshaped how European wars were fought, and would later be remembered as one of the greatest generals of the age. But greatness on the battlefield doesn't always translate to wisdom in the shipyard. And in the case of the Vasa, the king's confidence, his absolute certainty that he knew best, would sink his own flagship in under half an hour. To understand why the Vasa mattered so much, you have to understand the world Sweden was fighting to survive in. By the 1620s, Europe was being torn apart by the 30 Years' War, one of the deadliest conflicts in European history. Sweden was locked in a bitter ongoing struggle with Poland-Lithuania for control of the Baltic coastline, a region worth fighting over because it meant trade, tax revenue, and strategic dominance. Gustavus Adolphus needed a navy that could project power far beyond his own shores. Sweden already had warships, but he wanted something unprecedented, a vessel that combined unmatched firepower with visual grandeur, a ship that would announce to every rival monarch in Europe that Sweden was no longer a regional player. It was a great power now. So in 1625, the king commissioned a new warship from master shipwright Henrik Hubertson, a Dutch shipbuilder with decades of experience. The original design called for a large but fairly conventional warship. Similar to others Hubertson had already built, it would carry one deck of heavy guns, powerful but not radical. Then the king changed his mind. And that's where the trouble began. While Vasa was already under construction, Gustavus Adolphus received reports that Denmark, Sweden's fiercest rival, was building a warship with 2 full decks of cannons. Not to be outdone, the king demanded that his own shipwright do the same. There was a problem. Vasa's hull had already been designed and partially built for a single gun deck. Adding a second deck of heavy cannons on top would dramatically raise the ship's center of gravity, an engineering nightmare for a hull that wasn't built to carry that kind of weight up high. Hubertson understood the risk. Shipbuilding in the 17th century wasn't guesswork. Dutch and Swedish shipwrights had generations of hands-on experience, even without modern engineering formulas. But there was no established mathematical method yet to calculate stability with total certainty. What existed was tradition, proportion, and hard-earned intuition, and every instinct available told Hubertson this modification was dangerous. He tried to adapt. Then, partway through construction, Henrik Hubertson fell seriously ill and died before the ship was finished, leaving an unfinished, already compromised design in the hands of his assistant, Hein Jacobsen. Meanwhile, the king kept adding demands: more cannons, more carvings, more gold leaf, more grandeur. Each request pushed the ship's weight higher and higher above the waterline, and every time the shipbuilders faced the same impossible choice: satisfy the king or speak up and risk his fury. At one point, the shipyard actually ran a stability test. 30 sailors were ordered to run in unison from one side of the deck to the other, a common method of the era for judging whether a ship was top-heavy. After just a few passes, the ship rocked so violently that the test had to be stopped before it capsized right there at the dock. The naval official overseeing the test was alarmed enough to report it, but Gustavus Adolphus was away at war, pressing his campaign in Poland, demanding his warship be finished and sent to sea. No one wanted to be the person who told the king his masterpiece was a floating disaster. So, construction continued. Here's the brutal irony at the center of this story. Everyone involved in building the Vasa, the shipwrights, the naval officers, the sailors who tested it, had genuine reason to believe this ship might not survive open water. They added as much ballast as they physically could to weigh down the bottom of the hull and counteract the top-heavy design. It wasn't enough. The ship simply had too much weight, sitting too high above the waterline. The extra deck of cannons, the thick oak carvings, the ornamentation the king had personally demanded. Nobody stopped it. Not because they didn't understand the danger, but because the political cost of contradicting an absolute monarch, one actively winning battles abroad and expecting a triumphant flagship waiting for him, was simply too high. This is the turning point that decided everything. Not a single dramatic decision, but dozens of smaller ones, each person along the chain choosing silence over risk, hoping the ship would somehow be fine, hoping the problem would become someone else's responsibility. It wouldn't be. August 10th, 1628. The day had finally come. Vasa set sail from Stockholm, its cannons firing celebratory salutes, its golden lion figurehead catching the afternoon light, its sails unfurling for the very first time in front of a harbour full of cheering onlookers. Sailors' families lined the docks. Foreign diplomats watched. This was meant to be the proudest moment in the young Swedish Navy's history. The wind picked up, just enough to lean the ship gently to one side. That was all it took. Water surged through the open lower gun ports, left open so the crew could fire another round of ceremonial salutes. The ship listed further and further. Panic broke out on deck as sailors scrambled for the rigging, screaming for help that couldn't reach them in time. Within minutes, Vasa rolled completely onto its side. Water flooded the lower decks. The ship that had taken over 2 years and enormous royal expense to build sank less than a nautical mile from where it had just been launched, in full view of the very crowd gathered to celebrate it. Estimates of the dead range between 30 and 50 people, men, and possibly some women and children who had been allowed aboard for the celebratory voyage. Survivors were pulled from the freezing water by nearby boats that rushed to help, while others clung to floating wreckage and debris from the ship's ornate carvings, the very decorations that had helped doom it now bobbing uselessly in the water beside them. The entire disaster took less than 20 minutes from launch to sinking. Sweden was stunned. This wasn't an enemy attack. This wasn't a storm at sea. This was a national embarrassment that happened on home turf, in calm water, in front of the entire capital. An official inquiry was launched almost immediately. Surviving officers, shipwrights, and sailors were called to testify, and the questioning was relentless. Who was responsible? Who knew the ship was unstable? Why wasn't something done? The investigation confirmed what many already suspected. The ship simply didn't have enough ballast to counterbalance its top-heavy design. But when investigators pressed further, searching for someone to blame, the trail led back toward decisions the king himself had made. The additional gun deck, the extravagant carvings, the relentless pressure to finish and launch quickly. No one was ever formally punished for the disaster, not because there was no fault to find, but because pinning the blame on the men who tried and failed to warn the king would have meant confronting an uncomfortable truth. The person most responsible for this catastrophe was sitting on the throne. Gustavus Adolphus, still fighting his war abroad, was reportedly furious and demanded answers, seemingly unable or unwilling to see his own role in the disaster. Vasa settled into the cold, brackish, low-oxygen water of Stockholm Harbor, conditions that happened to be almost perfectly suited for preserving wood. And there it remained, forgotten, buried in mud and silence for over 3 centuries. In 1961, a marine archaeologist named Anders Franzen, who had spent years searching historical records and diving in the harbor, finally located the wreck and helped lead the effort to raise it. When Vasa broke the surface of Stockholm Harbor after 333 years underwater, it emerged in astonishing condition. Nearly 98% of the original ship intact, still covered in its carved wooden sculptures. It remains, to this day, one of the best preserved 17th century ships in the entire world. Today, the Vasa sits inside a purpose-built museum in Stockholm, one of the most visited museums in Scandinavia. Historians, engineers, and naval architects have studied it for decades, and it's now taught as a case study, not just in maritime history, but in engineering programs and business schools around the world, as a lesson in the catastrophic cost of ignoring expert warnings to satisfy the demands of power. The Vasa wasn't destroyed by an enemy fleet. It wasn't lost to a violent storm or bad luck. It sank because the people who understood the danger were too afraid to say no to the one man who refused to hear it. Nearly 400 years later, the lesson hasn't gone anywhere. Organizations still sink projects, and sometimes people chasing a leader's vision that no one dared to question. Warnings still get buried under the weight of ambition, deadlines, and fear of speaking up. Vasa rests today not as a monument to Swedish naval power exactly as the king once intended, but as something far more valuable. A frozen 300-year-old warning that the most dangerous flaw in any great design is rarely the wood, the iron, or the math. It's the silence of the people who already knew. Empires are built by ambition and lost by silence. We tell these stories so they're never forgotten. This is Crowns and Spear, where the past still speaks. Do well to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification button to get notified on our next stories. Thanks for watching.